In this video, I would like to look at a study of creation and including the creation of the world and the creation of humankind based upon the book of Genesis and the Bible. It is interesting as we come to the book of Genesis, we see a number of ways that God has revealed himself. In Genesis 1 and 2, there's a number of images that drive home who God is. First of all, he's the king. He's the king on the throne. That's the first thing that we see as he speaks creation into being. As a king, let there be this, let there be that, and so forth. Secondly, he's a potter. We have that imagery in chapter 2. From the idea to fashion, from Yatsar, he makes man. He is like a potter at work. Thirdly, he is a builder in Genesis chapter 2. He creates women from the Hebrew word bana, to build. And this is related to the Akkadian word banu, which means to build. So as we look at these different images, we begin with God as king, as he speaks on his throne. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. There's the king speaking. Again, verse 6, and God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and it was so. Verse 9, and God said, let the waters be gathered together unto one place, and that happened. And then in verse 11, and God said, let the earth bring forth grass, herb yielding seed, and so forth. And then verse 14, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night. Notice all the way through here, the imagery is that of a king on the throne. And so having looked at that, he then says, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. And here again, I cannot help but feel it's not only a king addressing his court, but I think it also, in my own understanding, reading the New Testament into my understanding, is the idea of the triune Godhead speaking here as well. As we move on into chapter 2, we see God as a gardener and as a potter and as a builder. For example, in Genesis chapter 2, we see he planted a garden and we see that and God, out of the ground, God made to grow every tree that is pleasant for the sight and good for food, and the tree of life in the midst of the garden. So we see the gardener at work. We also see a potter in the imagery. And the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. The word formed, yatsar, is the Hebrew word that is used of yotzer, of a potter. So God forms. He does the work of a potter in forming man. Secondly, he is a builder. God caused Adam to fall asleep, the text says, and he took the rib out of the man, and the Lord from that made a woman and brought her unto the man. And the idea here is that he built a woman. In other words, from the Hebrew word to build. And so as we look at this, we now see God in the imagery of a king, of a gardener, of a potter, and of a builder, creating man and woman in the very beginning. And then in creating the world, then we see a little bit more about the creation narrative in Genesis 1:1 to 2:25. When we read Genesis 1, the Ruach Elohim merachefet al panei hamayim, the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the water. That word, rahav, is used again in Deuteronomy 32:11 of an eagle hovering over its young, from the word rahav, it's a PL stem there, to get maturity, to cause the immaturity of creation to come to maturity, as an eagle hovers over her nest to bring immature young to maturity in teaching them to fly. And so that's the word that's used in the very beginning. And the Lord God, Merachephet, was hovering like an eagle over her young to get them out of the nest to fly. The Lord God was doing that in the very beginning. Notice day one, God creates the light first. Dark ocean is the earth. And again, there's a statement here in the ancient Near East against the idea of sun worship. Here, God is the source of light to be worshipped, not Shamish, not the sun or Shamshu. We see, which is the Akkadian word meaning sun, the sun god. God is the source of light on day one. Secondly, God divides the waters. The expanse, the rakia, created an image of a hammered out disc put between waters to divide the waters. It's interesting when we compare Genesis 1 with the Babylonian account of creation called Enuma Elish. As we look at that account, how different the biblical account is. The Enuma Elish story develops the narrative of the great Babylonian god Marduk. Two waters, one fresh and one salt, gave birth to other gods. And this came from Apsu, the male, and Tiamat, the female. The Igigi then were born. These were the children. So you had a theogony in Enuma Elish, a birthing of the gods. The father, though, decided to get rid of the children because they were noisy. So instead, the children destroy the father, that is Apsu. And Tiamat, the female mother, becomes a raging deity that the Igigi, the children, decide that Marduk must struggle and defeat her. And this is all going on in the background of Enuma Elish. And so he defeats her. With half of her, he forms the heaven, and with half the earth. What a difference in Genesis. And I'm certain that Genesis, and I take it to be Moses rather than the priestly source, that God basically only has to speak as a king, and the waters are created. There's no struggle. He is the king on the throne. And as a Christian minister, I'm reminded of John 1:1 in the beginning, that Christ was the agent of creation, the eternal word, the eternal memra, the Aramaic word for God, used interchangeably with word. So God basically, or Christ, is the eternal word that creates all things. All things were made by him. Looking at a New Testament application. On day 3, the waters go to one place and earth is formed. It is interesting in my mind that in the Canaanite Ugaritic Baal or Baal narrative, Baal is constantly struggling with the sea or Yam. God is able, what a difference, to control it easily by sending the waters to their place. God doesn't struggle. He just sends them to the place where he wants them to be. There's no struggle. Furthermore, on day 4, God creates the light holders of the sun and the moon. So it's interesting. God creates the sun and the moon. You don't worship the sun or the moon, which is what was happening in ancient Babylonian religion or in Egyptian religion, but you worship God who created them to serve humanity. So here we have a powerful statement against any kind of worship of the sun or the moon. Uh, God is the one that you worship. It's interesting, there is a reference here, I believe, to the festivals of the year. Leviticus 23. For the light holders, the sun and the moon, are seasons that define seasons, I should say, or indicate the times for yearly festivals, the yearly Mo'adim. So worship God, not the sun or the moon. They are simply God's servant, and they point to the festivals at which Israel was to worship the Lord. And it's also interesting to me that that the text says big light and little light. The big light represents the sun to rule the day. The little light points to the moon that rules the night. Notice the text totally depersonalizes the sun and the moon. They're just big light and little light. The Hebrew does not use the name Shemesh, sun, or Yareach, for moon, so as to even suggest a personification that they might be worshipped. It's interesting, in Akkadian, the ancient Babylonian cuneiform, Shamshu is the sun god who was worshipped. The Hebrew word Shemesh or Shamash sounds too close to the Babylonian sun god in name, so it is simply depersonalized and is simply called Big Light. It's also interesting, the sun was worshipped in Ra in Egyptian religion. Again, what a difference. In Genesis, God is the source of creation. He is the one to be adored and worshiped. Other ancient Eastern religions find God, their gods, to be a part of creation. And what a difference when we're reading the biblical record over against the other ancient Near Eastern records, especially of Akkadian, Enuma Elish, and we could even say the Sumerian accounts, as well as the Egyptian account. Furthermore, on day 5, God creates fish and birds. It is interesting to me that in Egyptian religion, animals were worshipped. Here they are only the creation of God. In the Baal epic, the sea dragon was always plaguing Baal or Baal, the Canaanite god. Here we are told that Yahweh creates the sea, the big sea whale, and assigns it to its proper swimming place, habitation, showing again the one you worship is God, not Baal. And then also in the creation of man, which is the climax of chapter 1, creation of man, it reads, let us make man. God's court is being addressed here in Hebrew teaching. And I believe the let us, as we look at the full revelation, including the New Testament, includes the Trinity, where we're told in John 1 that all things were made by Christ, the Word. So here we represent God here as having dominion, as king over all animals. We then are God's viceroy. Man is a slave to gods according to the Babylonian account. Man simply does the work of the gods. But here we are over the creation, not serving it. So we are the centerpiece of God's creation in the biblical account, the text is saying. We're not an afterthought where he took Kingu and the blood of Kingu in the Babylonian account and created savage man. No, we have a whole different objective, the text is saying. We are not an afterthought. The word Tselem, image in Hebrew, is related linguistically to Salmun, the Akkadian word meaning a statue of a god or a king. We as humans are like God's statue. We represent him in the world. And this also is shown in the dignity of man in Psalm 8. Ma anosh ki tiv korenu ben adam ki tiv kadenu. What is man that you remember him, or the Son of Man that you visit him? So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to continue as we move on into chapter 7. Actually, day 7 completes the creation cycle, where one day is set apart to worship God on the Shabbat. And as a Christian minister, Sunday is the New Testament version of the time to worship because of the new creation in the resurrection. Let me just stop there, and we'll continue on where we have left off.